Hey, everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar podcast on the CLNS Media Network, powered as always by the great friends at Prize Picks. Back with me on this episode of the Jungle Roar pod, the one and only Dan Hoard, of course, the voice of the Cincinnati Bengals. And Dano, we are now just about a week away from training camp opening for the 2026 Bengals. I cannot remember a season with so much anticipation and so much happening than the offseason we've just gone through with the Cincinnati Bengals. You would agree?
In terms of anticipation, Trags, I would compare it to 2022 coming off a Super Bowl. Obviously, expectations were really high. But then when you talk about the moves, they made more moves this offseason than they did that offseason. So it is unique. I kind of feel like when I was a kid and school was approaching and you reach that point where you're ready for that first day of school. Summer's been great. You enjoyed your activities, but you're ready to see your classmates and get after it. That's where I am. I'm ready for training camp to begin. If it were tomorrow, I would be delighted.
Okay, like school, I'm going to maybe throw in a change up here or change the chart of the course, so to speak, and ask you something that I think a lot of people have not been focused on, and that is what are some of the moves or what are some of the storylines that haven't been talked about this offseason that you feel deserve more attention about this Bengal team?
The number one for me, Trags, would be the status of the offensive line. When they brought back Dalton Reisner, keeping the five starters together that played so well for the last 12 games of the year last year, I was certainly in the camp of, okay, this is the best offensive line that Joe has had. They don't really have to worry about the offensive line anymore. And that's more or less where I am going into training camp. But they were very fortunate last year where health is concerned with the offensive
Right.
line. It's really hard to go through back-to-back seasons where your frontline guys start almost every game and are able to take almost every snap. Chances are at some point this year, somebody's going to miss some time. How good will the offensive line be if that happens? So for me, that's probably my biggest, somewhat under the radar storyline.
All right, let's, with that in mind, Dan, let's talk about the two rookies that were drafted. Connor Lew in the fourth round. He's coming off an ACL injury. He thought back in April and May that he would be very close to being ready for training camp and being ready to compete for a spot. We'll see how that turns out. Then there's Brian Parker, of course, the All-American first team or second team All-American out of Duke. He was selected in the sixth round. Then you have Jalen Rivers, who made an impact last year in his rookie year. I think those three players could play a big role in terms of providing some depth to that offensive line.
At center in both guard spots, but not at tackle. Brian Parker did play tackle last year at Duke, but at least in the OTAs and mini camps, he exclusively practiced on the inside. Jalen Rivers alternated between tackle and guard when he was at the University of Miami, but I think based on his rookie season, the Bengals have decided that he profiles better as an NFL guard than as a tackle. So I do think they feel relatively comfortable with those guys as the backups inside, but the backup at tackle is still a question mark. I thought that
Right.
Cody Ford looked like he had dropped a lot of weight since last season in the OTAs and mini camps, and that's encouraging. I thought at his playing weight 2 years ago, he looked pretty good. I thought he was too heavy last year and didn't play particularly well. And then there is a slew of guys that look the part. They're tall, they're big, they're 6'7", 320, 330 pounds, but haven't had a lot of NFL snaps at tackle. So that remains at least something of a mystery going into training camp.
Andrew Coker, Corey Robinson the second, and if I'm reading my depth chart correctly here, Javon Foster. Those three names stick out to you?
There are others as well. They signed a couple of undrafted free agents that are tackles that are in the mix. They've always tried to have a lot of people in camp and on the practice squad, not only for depth, but also trying to identify under the radar guys that might be able to make it in the NFL. So some of the names that you mentioned are interesting, But again, they haven't done it at the NFL level. They're going to play a lot in the preseason in hopes that one of those guys can step forward and maybe be an answer as a swing tackle on this team.
Let's move to the draft class, Dan. And I'm excited and curious to see just what kind of role Cassius Howell will play in Al Golden's defense. If he is going to provide that hybrid role off the edge, can he drop back? Can he pass rush? What will he be able to do? He's the second round pick, of course. Bengals traded their first round pick, number 10 overall, for Dexter Lawrence, the second. What do you think Cassius Howell's role will be based on the limited amount of activity we saw in OTAs, because of course the pads were not on then?
Well, this isn't really based on OTAs or mini camps. This is based on who Cassius Howell is. His role is to rush the quarterback, Trags. I know there's been a lot of speculation about, all right, how often will he be a guy that will drop back into coverage? I hope it's not often. It's something that he's capable of doing. We'll see it a little bit, but he's a pass rusher. He led the SEC in sacks last year. He's got the most juice, I think, of any pass rusher on the roster. By juice, I mean quick twitch, blow by a tackle quickness, and bendability, if that's a word. So my expectation is for Cassius Howell largely to be an obvious passing down pass rusher that should seriously help this team's ability to get after the quarterback. And let's face it, that's a huge thing that has to be better going forward. One of the reasons why they've struggled so badly on defense is that when Trey Hendrickson wasn't on the field, they got very little pressure on opposing quarterbacks.
How much do they need from Myles Murphy this year, Dan?
They need him to keep getting a little bit better. If he ascends this year the way he did last year, he's going to be a very good NFL player. But the thing that I like about this team, Trags, is that they have the potential, at least, to be a version of what helped Seattle win the Super Bowl last year. A team that can come at you in waves on the defensive line. So we're talking about Howell and Murphy, but we're also talking about Shamar Stewart, Boye Mafe, and then inside BJ Hill, Dexter Lawrence, whoever else winds up being on the team, whether it's Chris Jenkins or TJ Slayton, McKinley Jackson, Landon Robinson. Those are a lot of bodies that have had either a lot of success in the NFL, some success in the NFL, or profile as guys in college that can make the jump. So we'll see which guys wind up being on the 53, but I do think they have the potential to come at teams in waves with the names that we just ran off.
I like to consider, and I don't know if it's going to stick with the 2026 Bengals, but the domino defense. Domino defense is what we saw from Seattle, as you mentioned, what we saw from Philadelphia Eagles the year before. When you have great players on the inside and on the interior pass rush, it has a domino effect on the outside, because a lot of times we've seen, of course, over the last several years, Trey Hendrickson getting chipped, getting double teamed. Sometimes you even see three guys thrown at him in some particular plays. That is, we think, not going to be the case this year with what the Bengals have on the inside of the defensive line. That's what I think. That's the biggest difference to me, that, Dan, and the ability to stop the run on early downs. First and second down, the Bengals have to be better at stopping the run. To me, those are the areas to look at for improvement this year with the defense.
Dexter Lawrence changes the math. Even last year, where by counting stats, he did not have a particularly good year with a half a sack and 8 quarterback hits, he was still double teamed at a higher percentage than any other defensive tackle in the NFL. So it's simple math. If 2 guys are blocking him, that's 1 fewer guy that can block everybody else. That means more one-on-ones, not only for the guys on the outside, but for the other guy on the inside. And in many instances, that other guy is going to be Jonathan Allen, who's a 3-time Pro Bowler, largely for his ability to get after the quarterback. So I wasn't very good at math, but in this case, the math is simple. The sheer amount of time that Dexter Lawrence gets double teamed, and again, it was more than anybody else on the inside last year in the NFL, that math helps everybody else up front.
I do think there are some fascinating names that three names in particular, that part of free agency for the Bengals this offseason that intrigued me. You mentioned one of them in Jonathan Allen on the inside as a defensive tackle. There's Kyle Duggar. What kind of role will he have? Will he challenge Jordan Battle at the safety position? Will he be a third safety? Will he play down in the box? Will he play perhaps taking some assignments of the opposing tight end off the line of scrimmage? And then to me, there is Zac Taylor. Those are three free agents to me that are kind of flying under the radar. How do you see those three working out and competing for spots in training camp?
I'll go in reverse order of the way that you just ran them off, Trags. Let's start with Zac Taylor. I think going into camp, he is the backup at slot corner behind Jalen Davis, but that is a real competition. That might be the most legitimate battle for a starting spot on the roster, whether it's offense or defense. They will give Zac Taylor the opportunity to make the case that he's better than Jalen Davis. Jalen played really well over the last 6 games last year. Once Cam Taylor-Britt got hurt, he moved into the starting lineup at slot. So he deserves to go into training camp as the quote-unquote starter, but he doesn't have a long track record as a starter in the NFL, so it's only fair to put that job up for grabs. I think Jalen Davis will win it, but I do think that Zac Taylor will have a legitimate opportunity to beat him out. As for Kyle Duggar, I don't really think that Kyle is going to take Jordan Battle out of the starting lineup, but there are going to be plenty of snaps for him. He's really good close to the line of scrimmage, so he could be an early downs guy to help shore up that run defense. There will certainly be 3 safety packages where he's the third guy in. I don't think coverage is his strength. So when they need a designated cover the tight end guy, I think that's more likely to be one of the corners, whether it's the rookie Takario Davis, whether it's DJ Ivey, who did very well in that role last year. I think they profile better as a quote-unquote cover the tight end guy than Kyle Duggar does, but I do think that Kyle is going to get a lot of run on this team. And Jonathan Allen was the other person that you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, It's kind of crazy that he's flown under the radar, and I agree that that's the case. It might not have been the case if they didn't make the trade for Dexter Lawrence.
Right.
But once they made that trade, everybody else was thrown into the background.
I think that's one of the beauties, by the way, of making that trade is you had that kind of, like, I'll go back to that term, domino effect. It kind of pushes everybody down the rung of the ladder, but in a very good sense.
Boye Mafe is probably the best case of all because he got a big contract. He got more than $60 million to come here, and really nobody's talking about him because of Dexter Lawrence. But I do think that Jonathan Allen benefits maybe the most of anybody on the defense from the presence of Dexter because they can't double team him. It's required to double team Dexter. Therefore, you can't double team another defensive tackle. There aren't enough bodies to do that. So Jonathan Allen will get a lot of one-on-ones. He didn't have a great year last year with Minnesota, but he didn't have a terrible year. He had more than 70 tackles. I think he had 3 sacks, which is low for him, but not abysmal for a defensive tackle. And I think the Bengals should be able to keep him fresher than the Vikings were able to do last season. He played 80% of the snaps for Minnesota last year. That's too many for a 10-year vet, and the Bengals shouldn't have to play him that much. I think they're going to be able to cut that number down significantly, keep those legs a little bit fresher, and if they do, I think Jonathan Allen will have a great impact on this team.
You know who you did not mention in the list of cornerbacks and potential slot corners? I'm curious where you think Josh Newton might fit into the secondary.
I don't think Josh played particularly well as a slot last year. I haven't really talked about this at length with Charles Burks, the cornerback coach, but just based on having seen him now for 2 years in the NFL, he just looks like a guy who's more comfortable outside than inside to me. I could be completely wrong about that. That's one thing I'm going to have to ask about when we get to camp next week. But I think in his limited amount of NFL snaps, he's played better outside than inside. So Again, we've got our fingers crossed that Dax Hill and DJ Turner stay healthy. They played 17 games last year. That's hard for cornerbacks to do in back-to-back seasons. So with Newton, Takario Davis, DJ Ivy, maybe some others, you're going to have depth at outside corner in addition to the slot. And I think that Josh is probably better off there. But again, I'll talk to people when we get to camp and see how he thinks, see what the coaches think, and we'll go from there.
I want to get to much more on DJ Turner and Dax Hill in just a moment. It's a scorching sports summer, and you can make all of your picks on Prize Picks. The WNBA and baseball are heating up, and with big tennis slams and major golf tournaments coming up, there's no better place for all of your summer sports picks than Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Thing I love about Prize Picks is how easy it is to follow sports and develop a rooting interest, and it works everywhere in America. With Prize Picks, you can make picks on the WNBA, soccer, and even baseball. And Prize Picks makes it super easy. All you need to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stats, then submit your lineup, and you can follow along with the progress right in the app. And with their new blended lineups, you can add a winner, spread, or total pick on top of your player picks for even bigger payouts. It makes watching the games even more exciting when every goal and every pass could win you more money. Prize Picks is available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Download the app today and use that code CLNS to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Again, download that app right now and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Back with Dan Hoard, the one and only voice of the Cincinnati Bengals and Cincinnati Bearcats. We can talk about pancakes in a little bit. First, Dan, if you don't mind, if you'll allow me to do so. But that's another tease for later in the pod. About Dax Hill and DJ Turner, you could make the argument that is going to be one of the big breakout parts of this defense in 2026. I was very honored and very happy to be on your podcast and talk about DJ Turner and Dax Hill. And I think they're going to be exceptional this year. I really do think both of them are going to have breakout years. What are your thoughts on those two corners?
Well, for people that haven't listened to my podcast, the one last week where you and 6 other beat reporters gave some of your thoughts on the upcoming season, you predicted that duo will go to the Pro Bowl, which is a hot take, and I liked it. It's hard for 2 cornerbacks from the same team to go to a Pro Bowl. I think typically the voters don't like to do that. That's why it's a hot take,
Dan.
Right, exactly. They like to divvy it up, but hey, what the heck? If they both have exceptional seasons, it's not entirely out of the question. My feeling, Trags, is that DJ Turner's breakout was actually last year. I think last year, statistically, he was one of the top 5 corners in the NFL. But my feeling is that Dax Hill is the breakout this year because I think they found the right spot for him. When they drafted him, the thought was he would be Jesse Bates' replacement at safety. He played that for a season, didn't excel. He wasn't terrible, but he didn't thrive at that spot. Since then, he's bounced around between slot corner and outside corner. And when we were talking about Jalen Davis earlier, it was the same time period. When Cam Taylor-Britt went down last year, Jalen Davis took over as the starting slot. Dax moved from inside to outside, and I think we finally saw his best NFL position. Pro Football Focus graded him as, I can't remember, it was the 5th or 6th best corner in the NFL in the final 6 weeks of the season last year once he moved outside. So he's got all the measurables: height, reach, speed, the ability to flip his hips and follow people, shadow people. He's probably not going to be matched up against the other team's top wide receiver. DJ Turner wanted that job last year and got that job. So I think that's the way they'll begin this season. So to me, Dax Hill at his best position, largely matched up against the other team's number 2 or maybe number 3 target, profiles as a guy who's going to have an outstanding season.
Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Could this be Joe Burrow statistically his best year, the best year of his career? And if so, why?
Well, speaking of that same podcast from last week, our friend and colleague, James Rapine, his hot take was that Joe Burrow would throw 60 touchdown passes
That's
this
a big
season.
number.
The NFL record is 55. So that's breaking the NFL record by 5. Peyton Manning holds the record. But as James pointed out, Joe Burrow did throw 60 his final year at LSU. And as I followed up by pointing out, that was in a 15-game season. So there is some precedent, at least at the college level, for Joe Burrow. I'll settle for 50, which would be a franchise record. There have been very few quarterbacks in NFL history to throw 50 touchdown passes in a season. If Joe does that, this team is going to win a ton of games. I do think he's going to have an exceptional year, Trags. He says it's the best he's felt. Now, I know a lot of guys say that going into a season, but he's had a lot of time to work on his body since that toe injury. He didn't play that much after it happened last year. I think he's in a good space mentally. They've surrounded him with the best offensive line he's had in 7 NFL seasons. He's got great timing and chemistry with all of his primary weapons. They're adding Colby Young that gives them another threat to stretch the field on offense. So I would expect Joe to have an outstanding season this year.
Assuming the offensive line is good and gives him time to throw, do you think his attitude about throwing away a play and living to throw another, or living to play and snap another down, will be more prevalent this year? Do you think that'll be front of mind after what he's been through?
I do. And I think part of the reason for that was the addition of Joe Flacco last year. I think one of the benefits of watching Joe Flacco start those games while he was out is that he saw the value of a 40-year-old man that didn't want to get hit except when it was absolutely necessary. Now, Joe Burrow's a different quarterback. He has the ability to extend plays, and that ability also often leads to big plays. And you don't want to completely subtract that from the equation. It's one of the reasons why Joe Burrow is among the best in the NFL. On the other hand, you want to minimize the hits as much as you can. So I think Joe, as he approaches his 30th birthday, has come to grips with the fact that it's okay to occasionally wait for the next down, throw it away, run out of bounds, occasionally even go down if that's what's required. But anything he can do to minimize hits and increase the likelihood that he can answer the bell for 17 regular season games and hopefully several more in January and February is a good thing for this franchise. And I think Joe Flacco's presence last year helped him understand that.
Don't want to talk about the end of plays, Dan. I want to talk about before the ball is snapped. I think what makes Joe Burrow one of the best in the National Football League is his ability to process right before the moment the ball is snapped to him. And I think there's been a lot of discussion this offseason. Should Joe Burrow go under center more? Should the Bengals get into play action more? Or should they play to his intrinsic strength, which is processing before the ball is snapped from shotgun so he can read the whole field? Do you have a feeling one way or another on all of that after having watched him his entire career with the Bengals?
I think Joe Burrow has 2 superpowers. That's one, his ability to read and process. Number 2 is his accuracy. So you don't want to completely take away what he feels most comfortable doing, and that is scanning the defense from the shotgun, having the maximum number of wide receivers or running backs or tight ends go out in their patterns and throwing the ball to where the defense is weakest. That's what he's most comfortable doing, and it has certainly worked going back to his 2 years at LSU. On the other hand, research over the past several years has proven that under center play action passes lead to big plays, maybe more than any other way of operating your offense. So I do think the Bengals want to increase their ability to do that, their ability to do it well, but as something in their toolbox, not as their primary offense. So I would expect to see it more, but I do not expect this drastic change where suddenly the Bengals have a completely different personality on offense. To me, that would be stupid. When you're the best at something in the NFL, and the Bengals are the best at operating out of the shotgun with Joe Burrow at quarterback, that should still be the thing you do most.
Bengals have been primarily an 11 offense, meaning one running back, one tight end. You think they might give a look because they have a pretty deep and I think versatile tight end room with 12 formation, one running back and two tight ends?
12 and 13 if Eric All is healthy.
Right.
And it
Right.
certainly looks like he is going into camp. I think NFL teams are running more 3 tight end packages than they have in a long, long time because of the success that the Rams have had doing that. And this is a copycat league. Dan Pitcher, Zac Taylor, and everybody that's part of the offensive staff spends the offseason looking at other teams, looking at NFL trends, studying the data, and trying to figure out, all right, what can we steal that works for our personnel? I do think the Bengals' percentage of 2 tight ends has gone up, and it will continue to go up. Again, they're still going to primarily be a 3 wide receiver team, but I would expect them to continue inching forward a little bit in their use of 2 and 3 tight end packages, assuming that Eric All is healthy.
Mean Joe Burrow. Do you think we're going to see any evidence that Burrow is changing the way he commands the locker room or gets after teammates in the locker room? Or is that going to stay pretty much under the radar, won't come out, we won't see it that often? I mean, I keep bringing up when I've been on other podcasts, the moment that stands out to me when Burrow had had enough, and I know you remember this, Dan, is on the sideline in Tennessee. It was the game they won. It was the Jordan Battle fumble at the goal line. They won the game, but the Bengals did not play well in the second half. They were sloppy, and he and Zac Taylor got into it. Do you think we could see more of that from Joe Burrow this year?
I've already seen more of it, Trags. There was one play, I've brought this up on some other podcasts, that I saw during OTAs and mini camps where the Bengals had a false start and Joe Burrow took the football and fired it into the ground as hard as he could. I've never seen him do that at a practice before. Now it's one snap in a mini camp. Maybe I shouldn't be making a huge deal out of this, but I do think it's an example of what Joe talked about when he talked about being meaner or more stern with his teammates. I think it's the next evolution in his leadership. I think Joe has always been a great leader in his ability to make connections with everybody on the roster. I think that's one of his strengths. But you were around Tom Brady for a long time. We often saw Tom Brady lose it when things didn't go well for the Patriots offensively. And I think that's the next evolution for Joe. I think he is going to hold his teammates to a higher standard. We may not see it all that often. We're not going to be in the locker room when that happens, but I think we will see some evidence on the field, on the sidelines, that this is something that he thinks is important going forward.
I'm a little surprised, Dan, we haven't seen more of it to this point in his career, but I think it's one of those things where it evolves, and he, in anybody's personality, whether it's personal or professional personality, sometimes that takes time to evolve. And I think Burrow feels the urgency now, and that I think I appreciate more now than I have in years past about Burrow. About Zac Taylor, what do you think is on the line for Zac, and how do you think he approaches this season differently, if at all?
He always makes slight tweaks to his process. Last year, we saw Joe play in the preseason games. I thought camp was a little bit more physical than it had been in his previous seasons. So Zac legendarily keeps these thick binders of his notes and is constantly going back and making comparisons to previous years in hopes of self-improvement. I'm sure he's done that this offseason, and there will be slight tweaks. But one of the things that I think makes Zac a great leader is that he understands that the most important thing is to be authentic. If he tried tomorrow to suddenly be Bill Belichick or some other famous and successful coach, his players would see right through it. He's got to be his authentic self. I think that's a strength. So a lot is obviously on the line. A team with Joe Burrow on it has missed the playoffs for 3 consecutive years. Now, a big part of that has been Joe's health. You can't pin that on Zac Taylor, but it's a results-oriented business for head coaches. And even as patient as Mike Brown and the Brown-Blackburn family is with coaches and front office executives, there's always a limit, and you have to have a certain base level of success. So in that sense, there's pressure on Zac, but I think he's going to live up to it. And I think the Bengals are going to have an exceptional season. I really do.
I think his good, close personal friend, Sean McVay, I still think Zac has taken more from Sean McVay than anybody else in the NFL. Would you not agree with that? Or not?
Yeah, in the NFL, probably. I think there's so many members of the McVay tree out there in the NFL. Many of them have been highly successful, including Zac, with a Super Bowl appearance and 2 trips to the AFC Championship game. So I do think that anybody who has worked for Sean McVay has observed why he's been so successful and tried to take the things that fit them and use them. So in that sense, yes. I hesitated slightly during the course of your question because I think that the coach that he has taken the most from is his dad. And Zac has said that publicly. And I think that all those lessons he got as a kid from a father who had been a college football coach, but during Zac's childhood was coaching his youth teams. That's the coach that when he's thinking about how do I want to handle the situation, that's the person he learned the most from.
Look, the players are getting excited, and I think there is this anticipation over the next week. When you're a broadcaster for the team, do you have that same sense that, yeah, the next week we have off, but my mind is so focused in on what this team is and what it could accomplish, and there's so much to cover, so many great storylines. How do you feel with a week to go?
I think we're all there, Trags. It's not just me because I have the good fortune of broadcasting the games. I think that everybody that follows this franchise can't wait for training camp to get underway, can't wait for that preseason opener against Tampa Bay that's less than a month away, and can't wait for the regular, I'm sorry, not the preseason opener is Detroit, right? But
Detroit,
the regular
yeah.
season opener less than 2 months away at home against Tampa Bay. I think we're all just so high on this team's potential and have so much confidence that the Bengals are going to return to the playoffs this year. And anytime that Joe gets there, you know he's got the capability of taking them all the way to a Lombardi. So I fully anticipate that my broadcasting schedule is going to go into the month of February this year because I think this Bengals team is going to live up to the hype and have a long run in the postseason.
Well, of course, and as we all know, where the Super Bowl ends this year is where it ended the last time the Bengals made the Super Bowl, and that's SoFi Stadium. You think there was a decent chance for a Bengals-Rams rematch, kind of like mirroring what happened in the 80s, 81 and 88? We had Bengals, 49ers 1 and 2. We could have Bengals, Rams 1 and 2. I think there's a decent chance for that, actually.
100%. Most of the power rankings have the Rams on top, no matter what website or expert that you check. Seems like virtually everybody has the Rams ranked number 1. Very few have the Bengals that high, but we know what this team is capable of. So I do think that that's a realistic possibility. I happen to run into my counterpart with the Rams, JB Long, the radio voice, a few weeks ago at the Big 12 Media Days because he does some Big 12 games for TNT. And we agreed. We basically said the same thing. We could be calling a Super Bowl versus each other's teams again on February 14th of next year, just as we did in February of 2021.
That would be a wonderful way to spend Valentine's night, and I'm sure your lovely bride would not mind that, and I know the lovely Deborah Ann would not mind that. It would be one heck of a way to celebrate Valentine's Day. By the way, what do you think of white Bengals stripe out on New Year's Eve with the chance for the Bengals to make the postseason? That is a possibility.
Yeah, they could clinch the AFC North with a win over the Ravens on New Year's Eve and then take the next week off and rest Joe Burrow and start Joe Flacco. That would be great. I think it's the perfect time to have the White Bengal game. It's going to be an incredible atmosphere, prime time on New Year's Eve in Cincinnati against one of their arch rivals, a team that they've had to face in prime time on the road in each of the last 4 years. So it's about time they get that opportunity at home. Trags, it's interesting. I get to, I've been to every NFL stadium while broadcasting Bengals games, and some are more electric than others. But for whatever reason, a primetime game in Cincinnati, at least to me, is as good as it gets. The team does a fantastic job with the presentation of those primetime games. Cincinnati fans really get into it. And my colleagues have told me the same thing. After the Bengals have played other teams at home in primetime, the radio broadcasters from those teams have said to me, man, that atmosphere was incredible. So Cincinnati brings it in primetime at Paycor, and it's it's going to be electric that night on New Year's Eve.
Dan, I'm going to finish up with this. It's going to be, I think I warned you ahead of time that I might ask you about this. You mentioned Big 12 Media Days, and you are, of course, the voice of the Cincinnati Bearcats, football and basketball. Cincinnati football invited fans to pancake with us at an open practice on August 8th. What is that all about?
So the spring game this year got moved inside to their indoor practice facility because of a bad weather forecast for that day. So unfortunately, there were very few fans that were able to see this year's spring game. Some family members of the players were allowed in, but you've got limited capacity in the Shakely indoor practice facility. Yep. So as a result, most of the fans were not able to watch the spring game. So they wanted to give fans an opportunity to see this team in a scrimmage situation before the season begins. So this is the way they're going to do it. They're going to have a practice that's open to the public at Nippert Stadium and precede it with a fan breakfast. Instead of having, hot dogs or pizza or whatever, it's going to be a breakfast. And they're playing off the fact that UC should have one of the best offensive lines in college football this year. They've got a returning All-American at left guard in Evan Tangasdal. Their left tackle, Joe Cotton, was named first team preseason All Big 12. And Taron Tayo, who moves from right guard to center, has also received preseason All Big 12 honors in some of the preseason magazines and websites. So you can make a very legitimate case that from left tackle to left guard to center, it's as good as any team in college football, maybe better than any other team in college football. And internally, they think they're going to be solid at right guard and right tackle as well. So as we all know, pancake is an unofficial stat for offensive linemen. If you take your guy to the ground, it's a pancake. So they distributed boxes of syrup and pancake mix to members of the national media to try to promote this offensive line and maybe help it win the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the best offensive line in college football at the end of the year. And in continuing to play on that theme, they are going to pancake with us for that practice in August at Nippert.
Is there anybody better than Zach Stipe?
No.
Zach, exactly.
Zach is involved in University of Cincinnati athletics marketing. He's got a long background with some of the biggest programs in college football. He's at Florida State when the Seminoles won the national championship. He worked at Tennessee. We are very lucky that he's got family ties to Cincinnati and wound up coming here and working for the Bearcats. There is nobody better at promoting a college's athletic program than Zach Stipe. He is number one.
I'm glad we brought that up because when you bring up an event like Pancake with Us, this has Zach Stipe's footprints and handprints all over it. Dan, thanks so much for taking time out. I know you're looking forward to the season. I'm looking forward to covering some good football this year. I think we all hope. Obviously, journalistic integrity included in the equation. That this team goes far because it's always better to cover a winner, right?
Absolutely. Forget journalistic integrity. I'm all about calling a team that wins a bunch of games. I've been lucky during my tenure as the Bengals announcer. When I got the job in 2011, they went to the playoffs each of my first 5 years, which was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And obviously, ever since Joe Burrow's been the quarterback, you go into every season anticipating that it's going to be a good one if he can stay healthy. And I think his luck is bound to change. The play that caused him to miss 9 games last year was just a routine play. It was bad luck. It wasn't the offensive line. He got taken to the ground and tore ligaments in the bottom of his left foot. That can happen to anybody. But sooner or later, his luck is bound to change. I think he's got a good offensive line in front of him. I expect Joe to stay healthy. And if that's the case, this team's going to win a bunch.
All right. He is Dan Hoard. He does a fabulous job. I think you all know that, of calling games on the Bengals radio network. He is also the voice, of course, of the Cincinnati Bearcats. So I want to thank Dan Hoard for joining me. I want to also thank our great sponsor, Prize Picks, and, of course, the great team at CLNS Media. For Dan Hoard, I'm Mike Petralia. You know the drill. Keep that jungle roaring.